In this video, I propose creating a checklist on how to properly choose a tempering machine and discuss the different engineering solutions present in various tempering machines. The result of this video will be a PDF file that you can always use to compare different tempering machines and make the right choice. Let's go! We will move from top to bottom, and the first thing I suggest paying attention to is how the top of the tempering machine is designed. Sometimes Italian design has very beautiful shapes, but it is not always practical and convenient. For example, one of the leading brands of Italian machines has a top part designed with a slight slope. It looks great, but in reality, some functionality is lost, and now I will show you this. Typically, tempering machines have a lid. And we put this lid on at the end of the work shift to prevent foreign elements from entering the melting tank. As soon as we start the shift, the lid needs to be removed. And often, if there is no special place, the lid is placed on the work surface, on a peg, or on a shelf, thereby taking up useful space. But if you have a flat and even top surface, you can place the lid right here. This way, we not only find a place to store this lid, but we also always know where it is. I have often seen cases where different people on different shifts found different places, and by the end of the shift, another person could not find this lid. And it took some time. People were running around, looking, asking each other if they had seen the lid. Therefore, the first thing we will pay attention to in our checklist is the surface of the tempering machine. If it is flat, it means that such a surface is suitable for storing either the lid or for storing polycarbonate molds. If the surface is flat, you can place polycarbonate molds on it, and this will also streamline workflows. The operator will be able to simply take the molds, as if from a shelf, work with them, and then place them either in the refrigerator or the cooling tunnel. This way, space is saved, an additional work surface is created, and the pouring process is very quick because the mold is already at hand. I have a personal idea that I would like to share. It is to add a special unit here that would prevent the molds from falling sideways and backward, kind of like a holding cassette, so that these molds can be easily retrieved. An additional infrared heating to ensure the molds are heated before pouring. This is especially important at a fairly high casting rate, when we take the mold out of the cooling tunnel and want to put it to work as quickly as possible. It needs to be slightly warm to working temperature, at least 25 to 28 degrees. Again, 28 degrees. Otherwise, if we start working with the mold right after it comes out of the cooling tunnel, it has a temperature of 12 to 15 degrees, which is quite cold. There remains a high risk of defects in the form of incomplete elements, such as voids and cavities. And this is, essentially, the appearance of our product. Therefore, as a rule, on professional lines, in factories, there is always a heating element that slightly warms the mold before it is filled with chocolate. And here, in this part, it can be implemented because the surface is straight and flat. Also, pay attention to how this top lid is fixed and secured. The fact is that sometimes access to the internal components and assemblies is required in order to, for example, remove and clean the screw. And if there are a lot of screws here and they need to be unscrewed, it will cause some inconvenience. For example, on this sample, we see 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8 screws that need to be unscrewed. But there is still one positive aspect. These screws have a slot for a Phillips screwdriver. Thus, a Phillips screwdriver is a simpler tool that almost everyone has everywhere. Hex keys, if they were here, are a rarer tool in production, and it would be a bit more difficult. These screws are unscrewed, the lid is removed, and we have access to service the top part of the tempering machine. Well, for example, as I already mentioned, remove the screw, so let's move on. Apparently, as I said, we will be descending from top to bottom. The next element pay attention to is the control panel. It can be located at the top or at the level of the melting tank. Preference should be given to panels that are located on the top. The thing is, when the panel is at the level of the tank, there is a high likelihood of it getting contaminated. For example, chocolate can get onto and contaminate the panel. Simply after you have installed the glazing grid on the tempering machine and the chocolate has overflowed or spilled and ended up on the control buttons. This creates a certain inconvenience, and most importantly, with frequent chocolate spills on the control panel, it can malfunction because small amounts of chocolate can get onto the electronic components. Therefore, the control panel should be above the drain spout, which will keep it clean and protect it from getting chocolate on its surface. The next point to pay attention to is the functionality of the panel. Typically, on the control panel, we see two temperature settings. These are the temperature for heating the chocolate in the melting tank and the temperature that will be dispensed from the nozzle of the screw. The next four buttons are the basic buttons that include the melting tank, stirring in the tank, dispensing chocolate from the spout, and the compressor button, in other words, starting the tempering process. This is the standard minimum set of control buttons, and they are generally always present and available to everyone. But some tempering machines have additional features. For example, this tempering machine has a functionality that allows dosing chocolate and adjusting the dose from 20 to 1.5 kilograms. Then, when we press the pedal, the tempering machine starts dispensing chocolate at a specific interval. Every 3 seconds, it dispenses approximately 1 kilogram. However, it is important to understand that, generally, such tempering machines do not dose by gram or weight, but by the operating time of the screw. This means that with different viscosities in different chocolates, you will always get a different volume, and there will be some margin of error. And by the way, with small volumes, for example, if we set the dosage to 20 to 25 grams, the error can be 2, 3, or even 5 grams. This is a very large error, but a similar error on a 100-gram tile, 2 grams, is not critical and can be worked with. Therefore, if there is such a setting, it is good, as it will allow you to create product dosing, or for example, if you want to dose nut paste that contain cocoa butter, which also needs to be tempered, and there you plan to dose 200 or 250 grams. And with 250 grams, an error of 3 grams is not critical, so you can work with that. But if you suddenly need more precise settings, more accurate dosing, then you will need to connect a special dosing device to this tempering machine, which can provide an accuracy of, for example, 0.5 or 0.1 grams. For example, the company KADZAMA has a machine called the chocolate tempering robot. And this machine can very precisely dispense chocolate or nut paste into molds or containers. Regarding the connection of additional devices and gadgets, you can go a bit lower and pay attention to the drain spout. The drain spout can be arranged in different ways. For example, the first element to pay attention to is the possibility of connecting the so-called camlock quick-release mechanism. This is a mechanism that fits on and is secured to the spout with just 2 clamps. Through it, you can connect the tempering machine to a glazing table, or you can connect it to a robot, such as a dispenser, or to any other equipment that requires connection and supply of chocolate. And this camlock mechanism allows you to do it as quickly as possible. Another thing to pay attention to is the material from which the drain spout is made. If it is painted, for example, with white paint or any other color, there is nothing particularly good or bad about it. It is important to understand that the paint will eventually chip off and get into the product. Therefore, the next point to pay attention to when choosing a tempering machine is whether it is painted or made of solid stainless steel. If it's stainless steel, it means that the microelements of paint, which will chip off over time, won't get in because there simply isn't any. And this is another point to pay attention to. You can also look a bit deeper and notice where the temperature sensor is installed, which shows us the temperature of the chocolate at the output. There are, for example, tempering machines that have a very high spout and the sensor itself is located very deep, so it does not give us an accurate temperature reading at the output. By the time the chocolate passes through the spout, it has already changed its working parameters. And if we pay attention to the tempering machines and try to understand how they are designed, the closer the temperature sensor is to the drain, the better. And if there is additional heating, the machine will be able to maintain the chocolate's exit temperature more precisely. This is also an additional advantage when making a choice. If such a possibility exists, if such functionality and solution are available, then we give a plus in favor of choosing this tempering machine. By the way, I completely forgot to mention and show a very important element that few people pay attention to. This is the spout's overhang from the back wall, and now I will show you how it works. The thing is, we need to place the polycarbonate mold under the spout. And if the back wall is too close, for example, at this distance, it becomes difficult for us to fill the entire mold with chocolate without tilting it. That is, we have to tilt it so the chocolate flows. In this case, if we position it and even lean it against the wall, the chocolate almost covers the entire field of the polycarbonate molds, which provides additional convenience when filling them. So the next parameter is the distance from the back wall to the actual spout. It can be measured with a ruler to determine whose extension is higher. In other words, the one with the greater extension wins this battle of the spout's distance from the back wall. The next parameter This is the presence or absence of a vibrating table in the standard configuration. Not all suppliers of tempering machines are ready to offer a vibrating table in the standard configuration. If it is available, it means additional money that you will either spend if you decide to save on buying this vibrating table, or if it is not available at all, it becomes a big problem because the molds still need to be tapped and vibrated to ensure the products are of high quality. Let's pay attention to how the vibrating table is installed and how it can be installed. If we say that the vibrating table can be set up by one person without additional systems, mounts, and mechanisms, simply by placing it on top of the tempering machine, that's a big plus. The simplicity of installation and the absence of additional tools is always a big advantage. Well, here we see the vibrating table in place. Here, in fact, is its size. And what else can we evaluate here? Vibrating tables also come in different types. For example, this vibrating table can hold either 3 smaller polycarbonate molds or 2 larger ones, therefore size matters. There are vibrating tables when tempering machines are of similar dimensions, but it is just small by itself and can only hold 1 mold. The presence of a cleaning blade scraper is also a small element on the vibrating table that brings additional convenience when filling molds. For example, after pouring the mold and removing the chocolate from it, you don't use an additional spatula. You simply scrape off the excess chocolate with this scraper, and your mold is ready for further use. Therefore, this small element, which can either be on the vibrating table, needs to be purchased additionally, or is not available at all. It also makes sense to pay attention to the connection of the vibrating table to the tempering machine. Sometimes this is not available, but sometimes the vibrating table is connected, and you can control its operation from the top panel by pressing a button. At the same time, it is worth paying attention to whether there is additional heating for these rod slides where the chocolate flows. If they are not heated, the chocolate will start to solidify and accumulate on these rods as we pour it, making it difficult for the chocolate to pass through and complicating the process of working with it. Therefore, additional heating of these rods is also a plus, allowing us to say that this tempering machine is more technologically advanced, and it's great when the power button is already on the front panel. So you don't need to look for any additional switches under this vibrating table. All the controls are brought to the top and located on one control panel. In this case, this tempering machine simply plugs into the socket at the back and it works. And these buttons start controlling the vibrating table. I would also like to draw your attention to the loading tank. Different tempering machines exist, and the loading tanks can range from 5 to 60, 80, and even 100 kilograms. How do you determine the most advantageous and convenient volume? It is important to understand that the larger the volume, the more stable the machine will operate. In my opinion, the most interesting models start with melting tanks that have a 30 kilograms load capacity. Let me explain why this is the case. The fact is that the stability of tempering is ensured by the large volume of the tank. That is, if we have a tank, for example, with a capacity of 30 kilograms, we can easily produce 15 kilograms from it without any changes in temperature parameters, and the chocolate will be consistently tempered. As soon as we start trying to scrape all the remnants from the bottom, there is overheating in some places, undercooling in others. It doesn't have time to heat up to the required temperature, and the temperature curve changes, disrupting the tempering process. If you buy, for example, a tempering machine with a loading tank of 10 to 12 kilograms, it means that you won't be able to use all 10 to 12 kilograms from it. That is, 3 to 5 kilograms of residue will still remain, otherwise you will just get defects. And in this regard, for uninterrupted operation, warm chocolate is gradually always added to the tempering machine, replenishing the produced volume. And in order to add this volume painlessly, without any problems or hassle, it's good when the tank is large. For example, if we have a tempering machine with a capacity of 30 kilograms, and we gradually produce 15 kilograms, I can add 3 to 5 kg of warm chocolate without fearing a temperature spike. This is because I still have a sufficiently large volume of 15 kilograms of chocolate, which can easily accommodate the 3 to 5 kg of warm chocolate without changing the temperature. But if I have a remaining 5 kilograms, adding 3 to 5 kilograms of warm chocolate to it can cause the temperature to spike. Therefore, more stable machines are those with a loading tank of 30 kilograms or more. The second point to pay attention to is the diameter of the loading tank, the melting tank. The larger it is, the better. Sometimes it happens that the tempering machine has a large volume in the loading tank, but the spout itself is narrow, and this is extremely inconvenient, because if we fill the molds, after pouring we can tap and knock out the excess chocolate from them, and the larger the surface area, the easier and cleaner it is to work. This means that chocolate doesn't splatter and dirty the tempering machine, nor does it end up on the floor. Therefore, the larger the diameter of the melting tank, the cleaner and more comfortable it will be to work. This is another parameter that should be compared, and it can be easily measured with a tape measure or requested from the manufacturer or supplier. Moving on, the foot pedal for controlling the spout. This pedal allows you to stop the flow of chocolate, and if we activate the dosing mode, pressing and holding the pedal will enable automatic dosing. And you should also pay attention to this pedal. Sometimes these pedals are made of plastic, and plastic pedals tend to break quickly. A year or two of active use and the pedal just falls apart, requiring replacement. Therefore, pay attention here and choose a metal pedal. Additionally, the pedal should be easy to disassemble. The thing is, sometimes you don't know how, but one way or another, chocolate can get under the pedal and harden there. As a result, the pedal stops working properly because it doesn't press down fully. It doesn't make the necessary contact and stops working. Therefore, it has to be disassembled and cleaned so that it can be operational again. In this regard, it is important to ensure that the pedal is not only metal but also easily disassemblable for easy maintenance. If that's the case, we give a big plus in favor of this tempering machine and continue making our choice. Please note, on this particular tempering machine, the pedal is slightly to the right, not centered. And it seems as if the engineer made a mistake and placed it in the wrong spot. But in reality, there is a purpose behind it. And specifically in this case, we need to refer to human anatomy and physiology. We don't have a leg in the center. One leg is slightly to the right, and the other is slightly to the left. And often we work with our right foot to comfortably press the pedal throughout a shift, which can be 8, sometimes 10, or even 12 hours. It is much easier when the pedal is directly under the foot, and you don't have to bend your foot too much. This way, the foot comfortably and ergonomically rests on the pedal, allowing you to make several thousand pedal presses throughout the day without any difficulties or additional strain on the foot. Therefore, if the pedal is slightly to the right, it is also a small advantage, especially if one person plans to work on the tempering machine for an extended period of time. And another thing to pay attention to, if we look at it from below, is the wheels. Having wheels is very good. They allow us to move the tempering machine around. Often, all tempering machines have wheels, but there is one nuance. Pay attention to the following. The first thing is the ability to adjust the wheels in height and pre-adjustment. The fact is that sometimes production floors have varying slopes, and a drainage trap is provided for a more comfortable and higher level of hygiene. But this creates additional difficulties for installing the machine. For example, on an uneven floor, to ensure the machine stands perfectly level, it is necessary to micro-calibrate each wheel and set it to a different height. This allows it to be installed evenly. If such micro-calibration and adjustment of the wheels are not available, problems may arise on uneven floors. It just won't be horizontal, and the chocolate, for example, will flow slightly to the left or right. In general, there could be difficulties. The second point to pay attention to is the integration with other equipment units. Sometimes it happens that you bought a tempering machine from one manufacturer and a cooling tunnel and glazing from another. And they might just not match in height, causing a misalignment of 2, 3, or 4 centimeters. This needs to be addressed somehow. If the wheels can be unscrewed and replaced with wheels of a different, larger diameter, that's a plus. This means that by selecting the appropriate wheels, you can adjust the height level of the melting tank and connect it with the equipment you need. Therefore, the ability to replace the wheels with a larger diameter is also a plus. The presence of stops. If there are locking mechanisms on the wheels, this is also a plus because you want to fix the tempering machine in place so that it does not move and stays where it is needed. This is especially important when we connect the tempering machine. For example, with an enrobing belt and a cooling tunnel. It is crucial that it does not move. Therefore, if there are stops that lock the wheels, that's good. And this is another point in our checklist for comparing tempering machines when making a choice. Let's turn the tempering machine around and see how it is arranged from the back side. This was the panel that covers access to the electrical components and the main units and assemblies. One way or another, even if the tempering machine is working properly, it needs to be serviced from time to time. Remove dust and dirt from the cooling radiator, or clean the auger from small inclusions, nuts, and sublimits if you decide to cast such tiles. And for this, you need to remove the rear panel as well. What should you pay attention to? How is it secured? If there are a lot of screws on the rear panel, especially hex key screws, it means you will need to unscrew each one again. This takes time. You might lose some, and that's the worst part. If some smart guy decides to place, for example, a little jar somewhere, like here or on the front panel, and put screws into this jar, then at some point an inadvertent movement of his hand might knock the jar over, and all those screws will fall into the chocolate tank, adding extra trouble of fishing out each of those screws. And in addition to everything, of course, repeatedly screwing and unscrewing each screw eventually leads to the threads being stripped, and it will no longer perform its function. Therefore, in this regard, you can pay attention to what kind of screws are used. If they are hex screws, then you will need a hex key. If it requires a Phillips screwdriver, then it's a bit easier. Phillips screwdrivers are already everywhere. Sometimes it happens. With a simple hand movement, without any additional tools, the rear panel can be removed to service. Or diagnose the tempering machine if it suddenly breaks down. What should you pay attention to first? To how the circuit board is arranged and how accessible it is. If the circuit board does not have any special chips, rare components, or parts, that is very good. This means that a person with high competence as a radio technician can buy the necessary parts if something breaks, resolder it, and put it back into operation. If the circuit board is unique, if it has some unique components, it means that most likely such a circuit board will need to be purchased from the manufacturer. And very often, such circuit boards are extremely expensive. So the next question is, how much does a replacement circuit board cost if it suddenly burns out? What components is it made of? Can these components be purchased from regular radio technician stores for replacement if they suddenly break? And if this is possible, then it's another plus. Also, by the way, another point to pay attention to is the self-diagnosis of the tempering machine. Is there such a function? Now I will show you how it works using this tempering machine as an example. We start the tempering machine and begin to gradually activate its different parameters. The first is the boiler for heating the tank to melt the chocolate. We turn on the boiler and see several green lights start to burn. They blink, signaling to us that all elements of the heating unit are working properly, and that means everything is in order. We turn on the next function, which is mixing the chocolate in the melting boiler. And once again, we see the green light come on, indicating that the tempering machine and all its components are functioning properly. If something were wrong, we would see a red warning light, and the radio technician via video call would always be able to quickly understand where the malfunction is. This allows for very comfortable and simple communication between the user and the service department. I think those who have ever dealt with maintenance understand perfectly well that sometimes it's just difficult to explain what exactly broke or what isn't working. In this case, if there is such a diagnostic system, there is no need to explain anything. We turn on the camera, show which lights are on and how they are lit, and the technician quickly understands where the malfunction is. Therefore, the next item on the checklist is the presence of self-diagnostics. So, the next thing to pay attention to is how comfortably and freely the internal components of the unit are arranged. One way or another, they need to be cleaned from dust and dirt. The more ergonomically and spaciously the components and elements are arranged inside, the easier it will be to clean them. And here are some other parameters to pay attention to. On how the cooling principle of the feed screw is arranged. Here is the column where the chocolate goes up and pours down. There are two options. The first method is when the refrigerator tube is wound around the supply column of the chocolate pipe. And in this way, the refrigerator starts cooling the chocolate inside. This is not the most efficient setup because the tube has a circular cross-section. This means that the contact with the wall is very minimal, and the cold is not transferred as efficiently as it could be. Therefore, more advanced tempering machines typically use a water jacket to transfer cold. That is, the compressor first cools the liquid, and then the liquid is transferred to the cooling column, where in this double jacket, in the double wall, it cools it. And this is the most efficient and fastest cooling. Such tempering machines generally last much longer and cool chocolate in this tube faster and with higher quality. To understand this, you just need to pay attention to this feed column. If there are tubes with liquid connected to it, it means that there is a water jacket. If a copper coil, a copper metal tube, is wound around them, it means that cooling is done using gas, and it is less efficient. And if we further consider this parameter, the feeding column itself is perhaps one of the most important elements that creates the quality of tempering. It is worth paying attention to how the tubes connect with the cooling liquid and with the column itself. If there is a threaded connection, which is most often the case, it means that after 2 to 3 years of micro-vibration, this threaded connection will start to loosen and the liquid will slowly leak out, causing the quality of tempering to deteriorate. Eventually, it will stop working altogether and will require servicing. If the liquid supply is through quick-release fittings, and moreover, they are swivel fittings that are very mobile and not affected by vibration, It means that no matter how long this machine stands, vibrates, and operates, these mechanisms will never come loose, become slack, or cause liquid leaks. Here is a point and an element that should also be considered when choosing a tempering machine. Now we are looking at the auger element and the chocolate feed column assembly, and therefore the most important and most expensive element here is the auger. It is very often made of plastic, and a plastic auger is something I would definitely not recommend because plastic can break. I have had enough cases where clients with Italian machines had a small piece of plastic break off, and this plastic then ended up in the chocolate product. It would have been fine if the operators who were casting had noticed it, but the problem for one of the clients was that this plastic piece was already found in the tile by the customers, and they filed a complaint asking what was going on in your production. And the plastic in this regard is brittle, and the risk that a piece might break off and get into the chocolate is very high. Therefore, in this regard, I recommend metal augers. By the way, I forgot to mention another reason why I would not recommend a plastic auger. A plastic auger also wears out faster in the case of artisanal chocolate, bean-to-bar chocolate, where there are often particles that leave rough edges in the chocolate. Plastic wears out faster, and in 2 to 3 years it will need to be replaced. The tempering function will be lost. And the plastic wears out first in industrial works. The tempering function lost, the plastic wear out in 2 to 3 years, the chocolate feed stream become very thin, the screw worn. And based on these two criteria, I would always recommend choosing a metal auger made of stainless steel. Such an auger will not break and will wear out very, very slowly. Next, pay attention to the possibility of draining chocolate from the column where the auger is located. So, for example, when switching from dark to white chocolate, a very thorough cleaning of the machine is required, including this column, this pipe where the screw is located. It needs to be washed, and if there is no way to drain the chocolate from this feeding column where the screw is located, it complicates its maintenance. Therefore, we also look at this and pay attention to it. If such a drain screen is present, it is a big plus. Cleaning and servicing such a machine will be much easier. It is also worth paying attention to the placement of the drain pump. If the tempering machine cools the chocolate using a water jacket, then it is important to note how the pump is positioned. If the pump is positioned horizontally, that is good. Its service life is extended because the load on the bearings and the impeller is reduced if this pump is positioned vertically. And this is a small nuance that is also worth paying attention to. I wouldn't call it critical. It's just another small point that will help you understand where the technological solutions are at a higher level. And this is another parameter and another aspect. Moving on, to fully service the tempering machine, approximately once a quarter, you need to remove dust and dirt from the cooling radiator. And to get to it, you also need to disassemble the front panels, and if these front panels are also secured with screws and screws requiring a hex key, it means you will need to unscrew even more. And so, it can easily add up to around 50 screws that need to be unscrewed. As I mentioned before, besides taking time, this also introduces certain risks, that these screws might get lost somewhere and end up in the product. Therefore, the absence of screws that need to be removed to access the servicing of the machine is another advantage worth noting. For example, on this tempering machine, to access the front panel, you only need to unscrew 4 screws, which do not require a screwdriver, a hex key, or any other tool. There is already a convenient knob to grab and unscrew by hand. Moreover, the size of this screw is so large that losing it, even if it falls into the chocolate and you can't find it there, becomes impossible. Therefore, this is another point to pay attention to. So, we unscrewed the 4 mounting screws at the back. Next, we unscrew the 2 securing screws of the front panel. We remove it. Please note that in this particular model, we removed the front panel entirely, meaning that the front and side walls are a single element. And by simply sliding it along the rails, we ensured very easy access for its maintenance, for servicing the compressor, servicing the cooling radiator, and for its repair if necessary. In other words, it will always be convenient and comfortable for the technician to service this machine. This is another plus to note on the checklist when choosing tempering machines. As you may have noticed, there are a huge number of parameters to pay attention to. They are simply impossible to remember. That's why we have prepared a file with a checklist specifically for this video, where we have listed each item and each parameter that can be compared and measured. So download the file. Conduct your comparative analysis and choose the tempering machine whose parameters best meet your requirements. And with that, I say goodbye to you and see you next time in new review videos.